Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm Jon Favreau.
I'm Dan Pfeiffer.
Later on the pod, you'll hear Dan's interview with Andrew Gillum, who talks about his new re-election strategy. Apparently he has one. Finally, as a little treat, at the end of the show, you'll hear a quick excerpt from our weekly Pod Save America live Q&A, where What A Day's Priyanka Arabindi asks us questions that listeners have about the news, and we attempt to answer them. Happens every Wednesday here at Crooked Media. It's a great time.
You know what I'd like to hear?
What's that?
Priyanka, answer the questions that you ask.
I think we should probably do that. I'm for that. Anyway, you'll hear this at the end of the pod, and you can check it out on Wednesdays if you'd like. I know that you watch every Wednesday, Dan.
I'm not even familiar with what you're talking about.
See, that's why we're doing it on the pod, so more people, we get more eyeballs.
I won't listen to this part. I don't listen to our pod.
This is Elijah's genius. Okay. Also, before we get to the news, a quick heads up about a special election in Wisconsin next Tuesday, April 2nd, for a seat on the state Supreme Court. Republicans are spending millions of dollars to elect a guy who started a school that allows banning teachers or students for being in same-sex relationships. That's their candidate for the state Supreme Court. Lisa Neubauer is the Democrat, so if you live in Wisconsin, make sure to vote for her. I know we talked recently on this pod about special elections and how they're sort of going under the radar, so we will do our best to keep you informed ahead of time of any special elections around the country we see coming up. If you live in Wisconsin, if you have friends in Wisconsin, family in Wisconsin, tell them to make sure to vote on Tuesday. That's a very important seat in a very important state. All right, let's get to the news. The White House is in a celebratory and vengeful mood after Donald Trump's handpicked attorney general exonerated him from criminal charges based entirely on his own reading of Robert Mueller's report, which we have yet to see, which Congress has yet to see, which no one has seen except Robert Mueller, his team, and a few people at the Justice Department. A report in the New York Times described Trumpworld's mood as follows, quote, "Any caveats in the letter or the possibility of surprises when more of the report is released has not put a damper on the celebratory dinners at downtown Washington restaurants. The number of teamwork-focused photos posted on social media or the hugs in the White House driveway between television interviews. Quote, we're colluding, Kellyanne Conway, the counselor to the president, told reporters as she embraced Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the White House press secretary, in the driveway after returning from a Fox News appearance on Monday. One Republican strategist told the Times, quote, the mood from the pundit class to friends of mine that work in the White House is over-the-moon ecstasy. Meanwhile, the Washington Post says that Trump reportedly has a plan to seek, quote, vengeance and accountability from his critics. He's accused FBI agents of treason, said that Adam Schiff should be forced to resign. Adam Schiff's Republican colleagues on the House Intel Committee released a letter this morning also saying he should resign. The letter notably did not quote a single word from Mueller's actual report, but only made up a bunch of bullshit and talked about Barr's summary. Dan, we haven't talked yet about this on the pod, you and I. What was your initial reaction to the Barr report on Sunday, and do you feel any different today?
Well, John, I was actually going to cut this podcast short and cancel it and all future podcasts, because if you read all the smartest, most both sidesy pundits and journalists on Twitter and on the internet, we would know that this is pointless, because not only is Trump going to win re-election, he has won re-election. It is over. He was sworn in for a second term this morning.
A third and fourth term, I think.
With his
Fifth
hand
term.
On the latest copy of Greg Gutfeld's newest book. So it's done. Cancel it. And we should just, Crooked should only focus on Keep It and your slightly less political podcast, because this election is over. Don't even show me the report. I know what's going to happen. What the fuck are we doing, people? This is insane. Everyone, we are at peak stupid right now. Everyone is at stupid. The Trump people are obviously at stupid. Congratulations on reducing your criminal exposure by 18%. The media is engaged in a bizarre level of self-flagellation. The worst people on the internet are at their absolute worst on all sides. Everything is stupid.
I will say, Dan, I want to find the clip from a couple of weeks ago where you and I predicted this exact reaction from just about everyone.
Yeah,
I think we did it twice. There was two different times.
I'm seriously considering getting back in the prediction game because we
nailed
knew
this
exactly
one.
what was going to happen here. Maybe we can't figure out who is going to win, quote unquote, elections and who wins what state. But what we do know is how the political media, Twitter, industrial complex reacts to things. And it's very easy to always bet that they're going to do it wrong, which is what we did, and we were right.
And look, I will say that the Trumpworld reaction, which includes everyone from the White House to Fox News, because it's all the same world, did not really surprise me in the least. Like, I thought they would be celebratory. I figured that they would start, making all kinds of threats against all of their perceived enemies. Like, that was going to happen no matter what. I guess they wouldn't have been as celebratory if Mueller found that the president committed a crime. For in terms of conspiring with Russians, but they still would have threatened people. They still would have yelled about the deep state. I mean, like their reaction was predetermined long ago. Nothing about that surprised me. I'm not totally surprised by the reaction of the political media either, but it's a little worse than I expected. I'm even more disappointed in them than I thought I would. And look, again, we should never we do this too much. We use the media as a blanket term. The reporters who have been doggedly pursuing this story from the beginning, there's a set of reporters at the New York Times, at the Washington Post, at CNN, at BuzzFeed, at all kinds of outlets. Those reporters have just put their heads down, and they're continuing to try to report on this, and they're doing a great job. And they've been doing a great job all along. But the more pundit-like reporters, the reporters that write political analysis, the pundits on cable, the media reporters, right? They have just been doing such a piss-poor job, self-flagellating, fucking talking about, I mean, if I was faced with a situation where even from the Barr report, the Barr letter, you know that Robert Mueller, who's a pretty conservative guy, chose to use the words, the president is not exonerated from a crime, I would probably be more interested in talking about that than writing a whole bunch of pieces, punching down at some, fringy hashtag resistance types and their fucking Mueller votive candles. Like, it is astonishing what the stories that some of these people are writing when we have not even seen this report, but what we do know is that Robert Mueller uncovered all this evidence that the President of the United States obstructed justice. I mean, I don't know.
I feel like we all collectively, even though I would say we warned about this here on Pod Save America, fell into this trap where, and maybe Trump led us into the trap. Maybe he got there by pure Twitter instinct. I don't know, but we set the bar, no pun intended, so high for what would constitute presidential wrongdoing that anything short of that was then treated as complete and total absolution.
Yeah.
This idea that we had to find essentially a recorded phone call between Trump and Putin 2 years ago setting out a plan that involved hacking, disinformation campaigns on Facebook, followed by sanctions relief. That anything short of that would mean that Trump did nothing wrong. And everyone is, we all saw it coming. The entire political people who engineer the political media conversation in this country just saw it coming and then just drove right off the cliff. And you're right, there is evidence of obstruction of justice. Now, whether that reaches a level by which either a person would be convicted or a president would be impeached is a question we don't yet know the answer to, because they are hiding the evidence from us, which should also cause people's spidey sense to go off a little bit. And certainly before we have to, it's so crazy that we are all doing this without having read the report. It is a 4-page summary of a report that is somewhere between 300 to 999 pages. We don't know how much. And we're just Bill Barr, who didn't believe that a president could be charged with obstruction of justice, said this president shouldn't be charged with obstruction of justice, so let's all move on. Let's pivot, everyone.
I mean, and
Don't
again,
flagellate and pivot.
And again, in addition to the potential obstruction of justice, here is what we know for a fact. And we know this because Robert Mueller has told us through various indictments, through various court filings. We know that the Russian government interfered in our election in 2016, that it stole documents from the Democratic Party and disseminated them, that it conducted a social media campaign with the purpose of trying to elect Donald Trump. We know that the Trump campaign and Donald Trump himself knew about these activities. We knew that Donald Trump was briefed about them by intelligence services in August of 2016. And with the knowledge that this was going on, that this attack was happening, we now also know that the Trump campaign was approached by multiple people related to the Russian government officials themselves, offering dirt in the form of emails on Hillary Clinton. We also know that no one in the Trump campaign went to the FBI about this. We also know that the Trump campaign and Donald Trump himself specifically stood to gain if Vladimir Putin and his government approved Trump Tower Moscow, which would have given Donald Trump up to $300 million, his biggest real estate project ever. And Donald Trump lied about that the entire time. He had a financial stake in making sure that he didn't piss Vladimir Putin off by maybe telling the FBI that Russians were approaching them with dirt on Hillary Clinton. He also had a stake in potentially winning the election by not telling the FBI that the Russians were hacking our elections. The Russians were offering them dirt. And he didn't do that. And he lied about it. And various people covered it up. And his campaign manager committed a crime, and his deputy campaign manager committed a crime, and his national security advisor committed a crime, and his lawyer committed a crime. And Donald Trump was implicated in campaign finance violations. We know all of this to be true. This is maybe one of the biggest scandals in American political history. And people are running around saying, what a great day it is for Donald Trump. Well, how exonerated he is. He's feeling so great. It is.
What a hoax.
It
was a hoax.
It is beyond all comprehension. We are through the fucking looking glass. Everyone has lost their minds.
I have one just thought or message for reporters and pundits out there. I don't pretend to know what happens after someone dies, but I'm pretty sure there's no both sides heaven, where when you die, you go to the gates of heaven and you have to present your articles to show that you were willing to appease your bad faith critics on the right. It's just like, well, look, I wrote this piece also attacking Democrats, even though Republicans are 100% wrong. St. Peter, please let me in. Like, it's just, we make the same mistakes over and over and over again. And it's like, I think that, and we'll talk about this, but it is highly likely that a lot of people are going to have a lot of egg on their face after we read the report.
Yeah. And once again, all we're saying is, let's see the report because we don't know. Perhaps, even though the only words we've seen from Robert Mueller include the phrase, the president is not exonerated of a crime, perhaps there's zero evidence of any kind of collusion with Russians. Perhaps. We don't know. We haven't seen the fucking report. But we've certainly seen a lot of links between Trump and the Russians that the Trump campaign lied about. We know that, not from the media necessarily, although they've reported that. We know that from Robert Mueller's indictments and his filings. We already know this. Anyway.
And we know the president had incentive to obstruct the investigation because he was guilty of other crimes different from collusion that we also know about.
Right. So, anyway. So
man, it's a lot.
It's
really a lot of stupid happening.
We still don't know when the public or Congress will have access to Mueller's report. Democrats had been pushing to see the full report by April 2nd, but House Judiciary Chairman Jerrold Nadler, who spoke with the Attorney General on Wednesday, told us that Barr said it would be, quote, weeks, not months, before Congress could see Mueller's report, which, according to the New York Times, is more than 300 pages long. Nadler also said that Barr would not promise that, quote, an unredacted full report with the underlying documents and evidence would be provided to Congress and the American people. Barr is set to testify before Congress on April 9th, and Nadler said they may want Mueller to testify after Barr. Dan, how legitimate is this delay, and could this all be done faster?
If we were to be as generous as humanly possible,
let's give it a whirl.
Bill Barr,
yeah, let's give
the
it a
people
whirl.
of the Justice Department, it is a fact. Well, let me try that again. Seems very likely there is classified information in this report that originates from the counterintelligence investigation that began this whole probe.
Yeah.
And there must be a process to go through and ensure that you are not publicly releasing classified information that could reveal sources and methods for how the intelligence community receive that information. However, this could be resolved much faster than the timeline that they are on. And I promise you, if this was a report about Democratic wrongdoing, they could get it done by Sean Hannity's airtime tomorrow. And so, yes, there should be a process to go through and do this, but it is incredibly slow, and it seems intentionally slow to do what is a pretty clever PR ploy, which is get the headline you want on the front page and then get the details on, the 17th page 3 weeks from now when we've all moved on from this topic to worry about whatever the latest and probably legitimate outrage of the day is.
Yeah. I mean, how suspicious of Barr should we be?
I mean, not at all suspicious, John. I don't know what you're talking about. He is a card-carrying member of the Republican establishment that has supplicated itself to Donald Trump. He wears very charming, very preppy zip-up sweaters that are in vogue with lots of Republicans. Yes, we should be suspicious of him. He decided to work for Donald Trump in the middle of a web of criminal investigations. He auditioned for that job by writing a memo saying that Donald Trump could not be guilty of the crimes of which he was by mere fact that he was president. So, yes, we should be suspicious of him on the surface, and then his actions since then are very suspicious. Now, maybe, I don't want to head into crazy conspiracy theory world here, but the Trump administration has lied about everything. And so we have every reason to want to see the document and see it as soon as possible before we take their word for it. So there is a reason to be suspicious here, and Barr's behavior since this report landed on his desk on Friday afternoon had given us more reason to be suspicious.
Yeah, I mean, let's remember that before he took the job, Barr, who I assumed had another job or at least other things to do with his life, decided to sit down and write a 19-page memo to the White House in which he called Mueller's inquiry into potential obstructions of justice, quote, fatally misconceived and, quote, grossly irresponsible. That's what he said about Mueller's investigation into obstruction of justice before he took the job in a 19-page memo. I don't know about you. I don't usually have time to write 19-page memos about just anything and send them off. So clearly, the guy felt pretty strongly about Mueller's probe, and then suddenly finds himself the guy in charge of that probe and wrote a letter saying, you know what, Mueller couldn't make a conclusion one way or the other on obstruction of justice, so I will make a conclusion. And my conclusion is that we should not charge him. Oh, what a surprise after your 19-page memo.
Yeah, and it's not – the thing that is so – my mind is actually boggled by what is happening here because it is the position of the Justice Department that a president can't be indicted, and that it is the responsibility of Congress to come to the conclusion based on the evidence as to whether their actions warranted a high crime or misdemeanor as outlined in the Constitution. So why do we care what Bill Barr has to say about this? It's not up to Bill Barr.
No.
He can, his opinion is interesting, but it is not instructive for what should happen here. And it's just everyone is so in a hurry for reasons I don't really understand to get this behind themselves that we are rushing to close the door without having the information.
I mean, again, just imagine if this was Loretta Lynch, Obama's attorney general, saying that even though James Comey in his investigation said, he couldn't make a determination about Hillary, that Loretta Lynch said, I'm going to make a determination. She's fine. Except in reality, what James Comey said is no reasonable prosecutor would ever bring a case against Hillary Clinton. That's what he said. And she got in trouble because he also called her reckless. Her actions reckless. So But this was even no reason. This one was, I can't exonerate Donald Trump. I can't exonerate him. There's evidence on both sides. And then Trump's attorney general says, I exonerate him. I do it.
It's just, and in that same way, Loretta Lynch was like, yes, Jim Comey sent me hundreds of pages of information on said investigation, but I will not release this.
Can you imagine? I mean the House Republicans would be fucking burning down the White House right now.
Our determination here is really inappropriately putting his thumb on the scale. Like, I was listening to your very excellent conversation with Preet from the Monday pod, and everyone makes the point that in a high-profile case brought by being investigated by the FBI or U.S. attorney, whatever else, it will ultimately be the decision of the attorney general as to whether to pursue that case. It would go up that high,
right.
in a very high-profile, complicated endeavor. Except, yes, that is true if we're talking about a decision to, charge Facebook or, some high-profile individual. But in this case, it is the policy of the Department of Justice. They can't charge that individual. They cannot do it. It is not their job. They do not have purview for that. So he is simply trying to influence the jury here to not take up the case. In this case, the jury is Congress. And we're all like, well, this makes sense. Except it makes zero sense. It is a totally inappropriate determination for him to make. He doesn't get to make that determination. Frankly, shouldn't make that determination, regardless of what the evidence says.
So last time I checked, we do have one House of Congress, Democrats. They currently control the House.
No, actually, we don't anymore because some people talked about collusion. Kevin McCarthy, Speaker.
That's right. That's true.
It's
That's
over.
True. What can Democrats do to get the memo here? What should we be doing? Because I have to confess, my mind is even more boggled by the fact that, Jerry Nadler just said, I talked to Barr. He said, it's going to go past April 2nd. That's unacceptable to me. We need to get this memo. I'm like, dude, you got to haul out your subpoena cannon, man. Like, what?
Yeah.
What are they doing? What should the Democrats be doing?
I honestly don't know. We are adhering to these norms of behavior that made sense before one party decided to engage in a massive, inappropriate criminal power grab of everything.
I mean, is this even a norm, though?
What they should do is say, Bill Barr, you are going to testify by X date.
Yeah.
Or we're going to subpoena you. You're going to release the report by this date, or we're going to file a subpoena. And we've already filled out the paperwork. All we have to do is have someone drop it off at your office.
Yeah.
This is Congress's responsibility. Put aside the politics, how much, Democratic voters wish some people would go to jail for some set of crimes or whatever. Your actual job here, regardless of your party, your actual job here is oversight. It is to be checks and balances against an executive branch. And they are abusing their power here by trying to cover up evidence of potential crimes. And so every weapon or tool at our disposal we should be using. And just having friendly conversations with Bill Barr because he is the part of the jurisdiction of your committee is not the way to do it. We should be more aggressive here because if everyone feels like the Democrats are just acting overly political here. They were given the responsibility by the voters to do a better job than the Republicans of holding the Trump administration accountable for their misdeeds. And then that involves investigating those misdeeds. And simply just being like, well, they said he wouldn't get it, so I'm going to ask again, this time stronger, is not good enough, in my opinion.
And they should subpoena Mueller, too. Right? Issue the subpoenas.
So schedule a hearing. Say we're going to have the hearing on this day. And
right.
Mueller's either going to agree or he's going to be subpoenaed.
Right. Subpoena, get Barr to testify, get Mueller to testify, by subpoena if necessary, subpoena the report, and then if the Department of Justice refuses, then, fight it out in court. But I do think the longer that we wait here, the more the political media, as they have done so far, is just going to say, oh, sour grapes, Democrats, just hanging on to this thing. Let's move on, blah, 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 blah. Just do it now. I don't understand the wait.
No time like the present.
And then, even though it's been less than a week since Barr's letter, and we don't even know what we'll see in the Mueller's report, Some Democratic leaders have suggested it's time to pivot to other issues like health care. The number 3 Democrat in the House, Majority Whip James Clyburn, said this week, quote, "I believe that the Mueller report has been done. That's a chapter that's closed. Health care is the number one thing on people's minds." Deep breaths. Dan, why are Democrats so anxious to move on to other issues like health care so soon?
I really like Jim Clyburn, and he has done a lot of good over a lot of years in Congress. But I feel like in this case, he read the stage direction out loud. It was like, yes, Democrats want to talk about health care and other issues in the 2020 election. We know that because in the middle, prior to the complete and total exoneration of all of Trump's crimes, Democrats ran an entire election entirely on health care and other issues. And so obviously we want to do that. And anytime we get a chance to talk about health care is for the good of our electoral chances. But to be just so blatant about it is a mistake, because you can do two things at once. You can investigate corruption and criminality in Trump's administration and legislate progressive priorities at the same time. And voters get that. And I worry when we do things like this that are so obvious, that voters have a good bullshit detector. And so they see this and they say, oh, Democrats are being political.
Right.
Right. And so you're actually doing yourself more damage in the getting to the issues you care about than you would if you were able to do it in a smart strategic tempo, I guess.
Look, we were among many people who all through the 2018 election told Democrats, let's focus on health care. Let's talk about health care all the time. The Democratic candidates, to their credit, they did that. Their campaign strategists told them to do that. The American people wanted them to do that. They did it. We are currently a year and 8 months away from the November election in 2020. A year and 8 months. I think that out of that year and 8 months, we can take a couple of fucking weeks right now to demand this report that will tell us about an investigation that has gone on for a couple years into one of the biggest scandals in American political history. Like, this is such evidence of the fucking short-term thinking that just pervades Washington, D.C., where all the people who work there can think of is what happens in the next news cycle, who's winning or losing that day. I can't deal with any political pressure that's happening right now. I can't see beyond the next month, the next year. Like, it is crazy. They all work each other up. All the staffers and the representatives and the reporters and the pundits, they're all talking to each other. And so they all decided within 24 hours that the narrative is bad for Democrats, good for Republicans. Democrats would benefit from talking about health care. Republicans want to keep talking about how this was a witch hunt. And then the narrative is set, and so they all respond based on that. It's so silly. We are sitting here in March of 2019. We have plenty of time to talk about health care. Once we get to 2020, yeah, maybe we should talk about health care every fucking day. We just saw a 4-page summary of a 300-page report that has not been released that could show unbelievable presidential misconduct. We don't want to know about that? We want to pivot to health care now? I don't understand, man.
I think the best way to understand what congressional leaders say is not the macro politics of what the polls say or, what consultants are telling them. It's really about what members of Congress are saying to them at the weekly congressional lunch.
Uh-huh.
And so my assumption, based on some of the reporting you read, is that there is Clyburn, Pelosi, et cetera, are cross-pressured every day between a set of Democrats, probably in safer districts, who aggressively want to pursue something that leads to impeachment, right? You have Rashida Tlaib introducing, a resolution
right.
This week about that. Brad Sherman and others introducing articles of impeachment like a year ago or, months ago or whatever else. And then you have a whole set of members who are very politically afraid of what that process would do to their electoral chances. And so that is where you that like their reactions are driven by that, and the idea they can put that argument behind themselves and move on to what they believe to be more fertile ground, that would be good. But what resolves problems within the caucus lunch is not the same thing that resolves larger political problems. And this like abrupt pivot to healthcare is, I think it does a disservice to the voters, and actually it treats them as pretty stupid because they do care about this, and they do think that you can care about this in healthcare at the same time.
Right, and also there's some things that are just beyond political consideration, right? Like, we deserve the truth about what happened. Like, our election, our democracy was attacked by the Russian government, and there were a whole bunch of links between the government and the Trump campaign, and there were a whole bunch of other potential crimes that Trump and his the members of his campaign committed. Like, we deserve to know the truth about that. Taxpayers paid for this investigation, although Paul Manafort's assets refunded us. But like,
Did he do that for Medicare for all? I wish he was richer.
Yeah, no shit. But we just deserve to know about it. And at some point, you just have to say, politics be damned, right? Like, I want to know the truth about this. And it is, like I said, it is March of 2019. We have plenty of time to talk about healthcare. And also, we can do two things at once. Yes, of course, we should also be talking about healthcare. I imagine and hope that every Democratic candidate running for president in 2020 is out there talking about healthcare every day. And they should be.
We're going to do that on this pod right now.
Here we go. So a big reason Democrats should also be talking about healthcare, not pivoting to healthcare, but also talking about healthcare, is that Trump's Justice Department submitted a filing to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals that basically says it is now the position of the Trump administration that the Affordable Care Act should be dismantled entirely, and that the Department of Justice will no longer defend the law in court. White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney reportedly pushed for this approach over the objections of the Attorney General and other legal and political advisors, and he convinced Trump to take this position. So, Dan, before we get to the politics of this, how big of a deal is this decision by the Justice Department legally and substantively?
I'm not sure it is the legal and policy substance is as important as the political importance, I guess would be the right way to say it.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting the Bill Barr Justice Department to put on a very vociferous defense of the Affordable Care Act as it were to wind its way through the court.
Yeah.
It sort of says what we've always known, which is that Trump and his party want to repeal the law, and they don't care what comes next. And so it adds more of a political argument than substance. You know, we had a conversation this morning over text about how much we should worry about the lawsuit working its way through the system, and I'm very worried about it, and that's based on nothing other than the fact that we seem to be in a world in which terrible things happen all the time. But whether Donald Trump's Justice Department defends the law or not, I think, is only quasi-related to how much we should fear that lawsuit.
So the standard is that the Justice Department defends laws that are on the books that Congress has passed, regardless of, whether a Democrat or Republican is in charge. It's supposed to be apolitical. So the fact that they're not doing that, is worrying from a norm perspective. But what people should know is, who's going to defend the ACA in this lawsuit, right? Well, states' attorneys general will step up and defend the Affordable Care Act in these cases. So, yeah, they won't have the Justice Department in court with them, but the law will still be defended by some people. So you're right. Like, we should be as worried as we were before that a federal judge in Texas, struck down the Affordable Care Act as unconstitutional. And we should be worried as we were before that, as it goes through the appeals system, that perhaps other judges agree with that Texas judge. But the federal government deciding to defend or not defend that law in terms of what the outcome is probably should not be incredibly alarming, but it's pretty alarming in the case of, this is a norm that people follow. But let's talk about the politics of this. it seems like nearly everyone agrees that this is a monumentally stupid move, including House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who reportedly called Trump to voice his displeasure. So I guess no yellow starburst for him this week. Dan, how big of a political problem is this for Republicans, or will they just lie about health care in 2020 like they did in 2018? Trump tweeted on Wednesday, quote, "The Republican Party will become the party of health care."
Yes, they will lie, as they did in 2018, and it's still a big problem. My favorite reaction to this was Liz Cheney, who has some leadership position in the Republican minority, who said, "Why now?" Because implicit in that is just the most mind-boggling cynicism, which is, yes, of course we want to get rid of it, but we shouldn't tell anyone until after we have we've tricked all the voters, and then we're going to repeal it. And it's a reminder that Trump is such an accidental president that his response to what is theoretically the best day of his presidency is to immediately pivot in the most aggressive way possible to the issue that everyone agrees cost him the midterm elections. So, yes, it's a big deal. We should definitely take advantage of it. Healthcare can and should be the driving issue of the 2020 election because it is one that has the dual effect of motivating, quote, Democratic base voters and persuading what we refer to as up for grabs voters who can shift key battleground states into the Democratic column.
And it's just, them declining to defend the law in court is just one proof point here. Like, we also, Trump has proposed budgets, and the Republicans have proposed budgets that basically eliminate the Affordable Care Act as well, that make huge cuts to Medicaid, that make cuts to Medicare, right? So it's not like this is just one thing that we got them on. Like, it is very clear now that the Trump administration does not want the Affordable Care Act to exist. And despite the fact that, Trump's like, oh, we're going to have a great health care plan. He's been saying that since he was elected president, and we haven't seen anything, so I don't expect anything now. But it is clear that Democrats should make health care and whether or not we keep the Affordable Care Act a huge issue in 2020, right? Like, that just seems like a no-brainer.
John, noted truth teller and Mulan critic Mike Pence said yesterday that Trump was going to send a plan to the Hill. At which point I think Democrats volunteered to drive said plan to the Hill.
That's funny.
Whether they do it or not, I think what is interesting about this is voters care passionately about health care. It is really hard to get health care in the news, to shift the conversation away from Trump's outrageous behavior, very legitimate discussion around the investigation into Russia and obstruction of justice, other issues that dominate the headlines, to health care. And Trump did that for the Democrats, and so it's good to take advantage of it. And we should look for every opportunity to do so, as you point out, between now and 2020.
So in other 2020 healthcare news, there also happens to be brand new polling out on Medicare for All this week. Quinnipiac asked the question, quote, "Do you think that removing the current healthcare system and replacing it with a single-payer system in which the federal government would expand Medicare to cover the medical expenses of every American citizen is a good idea or a bad idea?" 43% said good idea, 45% said bad idea. In August of 2017, the margin was 51% good idea, 38% bad idea. I should also note here that Democrats in this current poll think it's a good idea by a margin of 69% to 19%. The poll then asked the following question: do you think that keeping the current healthcare system but allowing all adults the option of buying into Medicare is a good idea or a bad idea? Good idea, 51%, bad idea, 30%, with even Republicans saying it's a good idea by a narrow margin. Dan, what do you think of these numbers, and what do you think has caused the dip in support for Medicare for All?
The history of the politics around healthcare policy is pretty consistent, which is the more it's talked about, the more polarizing and less popular it gets. And that has to do with the fact that really like any debate around healthcare is a debate between people's frustration with the current system and their fear of what a new system would look like. And then when you add on top of that the fact that there's been sort of a pretty one-way discussion in the media about Medicare for all, describing it as socialism. And by Medicare for all in this case, I mean a single-payer system similar to the one that Bernie Sanders proposed in the Senate and essentially all of his presidential opponents who were in the Senate sponsored. That it's being hammered, and so when it becomes polarized around party lines, you're going to lose some of that support. I think the question here is that if you say, and there's also another, like, choice is a huge variable in the politics of healthcare, in that people always say they want choice. And it's why Republicans use it as an argument against the ACA. There's a big part of the argument for ACA. And so when you have a system that offers you more choice than the other one, that one is likely to be more popular on the surface. Understand that no one's gotten into the details of any of this yet. Just one important point on the choice thing is that choice in healthcare is largely bullshit, right? It is usually because most people exist within the employer-based system. Your choice, it's not your choice, it's your employer's choice. And so your ability to have the plan you like is dependent on your employer's willingness to give you the plan you like, whether we are existing in the current system, whether we're existing in the pre-ACA system, or whether we're existing in a Medicare for America system where people could move back and forth between Medicare and the private insurance system. And so we're really sort of debating around the edges here, but you can see sort of the contours of where this is headed.
And you made an important point at the outset, too. Two things can be true here. A lot of people can say, look, I fucking hate my insurance company. I hate dealing with insurance companies. I think all they do is want to profit off sick people. I think that the paperwork they make me do, like 50 calls I have to do every time I want to get a simple procedure paid for that should be covered, is garbage. They can believe all of that, and they can still think, ugh, but if we're going to the single-payer system, what's that going to mean? Could that even be worse than the situation that I'm dealing with? And so, single-payer proponents will say, but the single-payer, enrolling in Medicare is so much better, right? Like, you're going to get free coverage. You're not going to have copays. You're not going to have deductibles. You're not going to have to worry about these things. And so it is then incumbent upon proponents of Medicare for all and single-payer systems to not just argue, but prove that the shift from a private insurance system to a single-payer system would benefit every single American, and that, you're not going to have to pay more. Maybe you'll have to pay more in taxes, but, you're also not going to be paying copays, premiums, and deductibles anymore, so it's going to come out as a wash, right? But yet there's still that fear that exists among people that even if they hate the current system, they fear the unknown. And that's sort of the dynamic that's always been at play with healthcare. So Bernie Sanders then made some interesting news on this issue the other day. In an interview with Chris Hayes, he called for eliminating the insurance industry, which he's done before. That part wasn't news. But then he was asked whether he'd support Democratic legislation introduced by Nancy Pelosi to improve the Affordable Care Act by expanding federal subsidies and undoing some of the damage that Trump has already inflicted on the law. And Bernie said he does not support the bill. And this is notable because Sanders in the past has supported and voted for incremental reforms. And even progressive Democrats like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez support Pelosi's position. Dan, what do you think Bernie's strategy here is? Why do you think he gave that answer?
Well, Bernie Sanders basically won the policy primary of 2020 back in 2016.
Yeah.
And one of his huge differentiations with Hillary Clinton was he had these very progressive, very bold, very popular among Democratic voter policy ideas, including single payer. And since then, basically the problem is everyone has started to agree with him on all these things. And so it's harder for him to go out there and say, I'm for single payer, I'm for free college, I'm for X, because now every candidate either supports his plan. I would note that all of his Senate opponents immediately endorsed his Medicare for all legislation when he introduced it in the Senate a few years ago. And so he needs to find some sort of policy, or I don't know if he needs to find, he's doing quite well otherwise, but he apparently wants to find some sort of policy differentiation between him and Elizabeth Warren, him and Elizabeth Warren, him and Cory Booker, him and Kamala Harris, whoever else. And he's doing that by trying to go further left in being more pure on single payer. I think that is totally appropriate. I think there is if I personally could wave a wand and make something happen, the plan that I would pick would be Bernie Sanders' plan. I think the best way to do it would be if you could put all people in Medicare, everyone at the same plan. You remove the power that not just insurance companies but employers have over individual people by controlling their health care. That would be the best thing. And there's a very legitimate argument that that is the best plan to start with heading into a presidency, because you know that there's going to be efforts to try to move it closer to the middle. And so the further to the left you start, the further to the left the middle is. What I worry about is the other part of the Chris Hayes interview where he opposes improving the Affordable Care Act, because that, I think, is a dangerous level of purity, which is because by doing that, you're saying, well, I am willing to hurt people in the current system to aspire to a better system down the line. And I think that is a mistake.
I'll say this about this whole debate. I think that what we are having in the Democratic primary right now is a debate over how fast and in what way we transition to a single-payer system in this country. I think, like you said, and Barack Obama used to say this, if we were starting from scratch in this country, it would make most sense to build a single-payer system. It would be more efficient, it would be more just, it would be more equitable, it would produce better health outcomes, it would just be the best way to go. That is not the reality we have. We have an insurance industry in this country. That insurance industry employs 500,000 people in this country. We also have 250 million people that get their insurance from their employers. And so the question is, how do we make that transition from this private insurance-based system to this single-payer system in a way that causes people the least harm, that is the most efficient, that is the most cost-effective, and that, that works for everyone, and that actually builds political support, not like trying to get Republicans to vote for it, but actually builds broad popular support within the country. And that is the debate we're having. Bernie Sanders' plan, and by the way, the fact that we're having that debate is a credit to Bernie Sanders, and not just to Bernie Sanders, but to all the activists and all the people in this country who have pushed us to this moment. It is a credit to all of them. But now we are having that debate. And the question is, Bernie's plan, that has a transition period as well. I think it's like 4 years. And the way that Bernie's plan works is first, everyone up to a certain age is enrolled in Medicare, and then the age goes down lower, and then, you start from the bottom end of the spectrum, and then, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds get enrolled, and basically you start enrolling people, more and more people every year until everyone's enrolled in Medicare. That's the transition that Bernie's plan envisions. There are other options, right? On one end, there's, Sherrod Brown, when he was thinking about running, he was talking about, all right, let's lower the age of enrollment in Medicare to 50. Let's start there. Let's have all 50-year-olds plus be able to enroll in Medicare. Then there's people like Senator Brian Schatz, who have proposed a Medicare buy-in. That basically that's like a public option. That's saying, all right, there's all these choices of private insurance. You can choose a private insurance plan, or you can buy into Medicare if you'd like. That's a choice. Then, as you go up the spectrum, then there's Medicare for America. This is the plan that Center for American Progress has come up with. Rosa DeLauro and Jan Schakowsky in the House have came up with this plan. That plan says, all right, let's take every uninsured person in America and everyone who buys their insurance on the individual market, and let's automatically enroll them in Medicare. Let's also automatically enroll every newborn child in Medicare. And then let's say to every American and every business, you have the choice to move from your insurance that you have now into Medicare. Not a buy-in, just you can enroll if you'd like. And that basically says that the idea behind that is, if you build it, they will come. If you're worried about Medicare, we will show you how good Medicare is, and you have a choice to get into this program right now. So these are all different ways of transitioning to a single-payer system. And look, some of them may leave private insurance out there as a viable option. But the idea is, we will show you that Medicare is better than private insurance instead of saying, all right, everyone has to enroll immediately. And it's important to understand that that's the actual debate we're having. We're not having a debate about, at least in the Democratic Party, at least mostly in the Democratic Party, about whether we should have a private insurance industry where no one else enrolls in Medicare or Medicare for all. That's not really the debate. The debate is, what does the transition look like? How fast is it? What does it cost? What is the financing plan? All that kind of stuff. And I think there's, like you said, there's a lot, I don't know that there are any right answers right now, and I think it's a healthy debate to have. But I think we have to be mindful that, it's not just insurance company fucking executives and Republicans worried about. Who cares about them? But there's doctors to consider. There are patients. There are nurses. There are people who get their insurance from their employers. There are all kinds of things to consider. We have been through this with the Affordable Care Act. It is not easy. And it is not just about insurance companies and Republicans trying to kill our plans, though that is certainly part of it. It is about people's genuine fear and anxiety about how to transfer into a system that we know will be better for them. And it's tough, right? It's a tough debate.
Yeah, it would say that if you are all the various two things. I guess let me try again. Two things that I think are important here. One, if you were a candidate and you were running around saying you're for Medicare for all, you have to very specifically detail what that means. Right? Yeah. Bernie has done that. Beto O'Rourke has he hasn't detailed a specific plan, but he has expressed a very specific piece of legislation that he supports, the Medicare for America plan that you mentioned. So I think you have to say where you are on the spectrum of Sanders to some other version of Medicare for all. And it's not enough just to do the hashtag and move on. And I think that's true of every candidate. Doesn't mean you can't be open to other ideas, which is my ideal plan is Sanders, but I would certainly sign a bill like Medicare for America. You can have a range of options. And then second, if you are for Medicare for America or the CAP plan or some other form of a longer transition period, as opposed to Sanders, you are not a corporate shill, right?
Right.
We should just take a step back and recognize we were having a debate within the Democratic Party, about how quickly to move to single payer. And back 10 years ago, back in the 2008 campaign when we worked with Obama, the fact that we were having a conversation about a market-based path to universal health care was seen as nigh on to political suicide. And so it is take the win here, people. It is to the credit of the organizers who push so hard and keep pushing, of course, that we're having this debate, as you said.
And look, and the answer that I gave and the one that you just gave too is basically Elizabeth Warren's answer on this, which is she sponsored Bernie's bill, but when she's been asked about it, she said, look, there's a lot of pathways to get there. You can lower ages, you can have buy-ins, you can automatically enroll people, and I'm for whatever pathway gets us there. I've obviously signed on to Bernie's bill, but I'm open to whatever path gets us there. I think Elizabeth Warren has given great answers on this. Okay, so that's that. Speaking of 2020 strategy, Axios is reporting that President Trump has one. One former Trump campaign official said they plan to quote, make whoever the nominee is radioactive well before they get the nomination by making them look like a far left extremist. Quote, the plan is stay at 46% in the polls, that's Trump, and just make the other guy radioactive. They plan to do so by highlighting Democratic positions on Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, court packing, abolishing the Electoral College, and reparations. This comes as Mitch McConnell this week forced a vote on the Green New Deal resolution purely as a political stunt, where 43 Democrats voted present and everyone else voted no. So, just to start, isn't the typical incumbent re-election strategy to disqualify their opponent by making them look extreme? Isn't that what usually happens?
Yes. This story, and no disrespect to the reporters who wrote it, but this story is equivalent to someone reporting out, scoop, multiple siren emojis. We have a secret inside look at Duke's strategy to win the NCAA tournament. Duke is going to try to score as many points as possible while holding their opponents to as few points as possible. Yeah, it's very Captain Obvious. Not really sure what the news is here. It's also, I've worked on a lot of campaigns, and quote-unquote former campaign officials are generally not good windows into the current campaign strategy. So, yes, this is pretty obvious. We all knew this was going to happen, but someone got some clicks out of it.
So how can Democrats counter this? Because obviously, whether it's an obvious strategy or not, which we think it is, and whether the former campaign officials knew whatever the fuck they were talking about or not, it is pretty clear from Donald Trump's actions, his words, from Mitch McConnell doing this with the Green New Deal, that they feel like what they're going to do is paint all of these Democrats as extreme radical leftists who've gone over the edge, embrace socialism, and look at all these crazy things they embrace. How do Democrats counter that?
I think, we've talked about this before, but it's sort of the Wayne Gretzky rule of politics, which is you lose 100% of the arguments you don't make.
Yeah.
And which is why I found the Democratic strategy on the Green New Deal legislation to be somewhat troubling. Like, how is that going to play itself out on the campaign trail? Republicans are like, you support this socialist Green New Deal. And they're like, no. I voted present. It's like we have to go out and make an argument for the policies we care about and engage that argument nonstop for the next few years. What we can't do is before something, see a bad poll and run away, because they're going to tar us with the new Green New Deal as they depict it from now until Election Day. And so you have to make the argument. The second point here is, this goes to the obviousness of the strategy, but is the battle in a re-election campaign is between the opponent's intention to turn it into a referendum on the incumbent and the incumbent's attempt to turn it into a choice between the incumbent and the challenger. And typically what that would mean is that it should be the job of the Democrats to only talk about Trump. We have to make this all about Trump. And that strategy has worked many times in the past. I do not think it'll work this time.
Yeah.
I think we actually have to swerve out of that lane, and we actually have to paint very specifically and clearly and concisely and persuasively the alternative to Trump. Because there's going to be no, that could be hard to make things about Trump. Everything's about Trump. Trump makes everything about Trump. So the Democrat, instead of only talking about Trump, should spend much more time talking about themselves and let Trump talk about Trump, because he does as good a job indicting his own presidency as anyone else could possibly do. And so the typical strategy of just making all about the incumbent, the one that Romney used against Obama, I think is a mistake here. And even more so than before, we should be talking about the kind of what a Democratic presidency means, define the change that we are arguing for, because Trump will do a fine job defining the status quo that currently exists.
See, I think Democrats have to make it a choice as well. And I think so. I would split the difference. I think that it's a mistake to only talk about Trump. I also think it's a mistake to only talk about our own alternative. I think we need to, people are going to the ballot box. They're going to choose between Donald Trump and a Democrat. And I think you have to lay out, here is what happens if you vote for Donald Trump. And you don't talk about here's what happens. He says more crazy shit. He has bad tweets. He's mean to people, right? That's not part of it. These are the policy consequences of voting for Donald Trump. This is what's going to happen in your life. There will be 20 million people who will lose health care. Anyone who has a pre-existing condition can be denied by their insurance company. More people will be ripped away from their families at the border, right? We will make no progress on climate change when we only have 10 years left. Here's what will happen if you vote for the Democrat. More people will get health care, right? We will start combating climate change. We will have gun control, right? I do think that you can make the choice on policy terms and also on how it affects people's lives. And I totally agree that we cannot run away from these positions, which is something that Democrats have done in the past. I'm sort of okay with the present votes on the Green New Deal, because I think Democrats can say this was a stunt by Mitch McConnell, and the Green New Deal resolution right now is just that. It's a resolution. There's no policy. There's no legislation. And once we get to an actual Green Deal and we have legislation and we have details, I'm going to be for it. I'm for an actual bill that could combat climate change. I'm not, some resolution that Mitch McConnell's putting there just to fuck us. That's just a stunt. But I don't think that any kind of bad polls or Republican ads or anything like that should force Democrats to run away from this. I think, like you said, you have to make the argument. You have to make the argument. And we should feel confident, by the way, that there is popular political support for enrolling more people in Medicare, for many of the planks of the Green New Deal. Sean McElwee just had a piece in the New York Times yesterday, Wednesday. Data for Progress, his organization, and Civis, which is run by former Obama folks, did some polling. They asked the question, the Green New Deal would phase out the use of fossil fuels, with the government providing clean energy jobs for people who can't find employment in the private sector. All jobs would pay at least $15 an hour, include health care benefits and collective bargaining rights. To pay for it, we'd raise taxes on incomes over $200,000 by 15%. 46% were in favor, 34% were opposed. So, some of this stuff is popular, has popular support, and we shouldn't run away from it.
It's also, and I'll say in defense of Democrats, there isn't any indication yet the Democrats are running away from these things.
Right.
So
that's
this
true.
is more just like a cautionary note based on past history, not behavior we've seen in the context of this current election. But also the thing about politics, it isn't to find popular things and make yourself care about them.
Right.
It is to find the things you care about and make them popular.
Yes.
And literally the planet is at stake over whether we can make people care about climate change enough that they will vote people out for opposing it. And so that is the task at hand here. And that's why it's so important that people not run away from the Green New Deal, but also that presidential candidates lay out what their version of the Green New Deal looks like. They do not have to agree with the exact version that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ed Markey put out. They can have a different version of it, or it can be more aggressive or less aggressive, or reallocate some of the aggressiveness among various different initiatives. But the key is to define what you care about, persuade people that's right, and then turn it into policy. That's why we're in politics to begin with.
Hard agree. Okay, when we come back, we will have Dan's interview with Andrew Gillum.